The DSCOVR satellite. Is it fake? Is NASA lying? Do we have proof now? Let's take a look. Hold on there just a minute. Before we get into all of that, a little background just to get you caught up with where we are in the conversation right now. I've been speaking to Alan, friend of the channel, been on numerous times. Alan has presented some evidence that he believes shows that the DSCOVR satellite and the photos it took of the moon are fake. As we have this conversation, I'd like to slide into a slightly different angle. Instead of simply asking, were the moon landings faked or is the Earth flat, which I think all of us have already come to our own conclusions about. I'd like to use this as an example to really shine a bright light on how to think. Not what to think, how to think. With that in mind, Alan and I have come to an agreement on 5 specific points that we're going to keep in mind as we have this discussion. We're going to keep coming back to these. Let me share those with you now. The goals of these 5 rules are going to be to try to attain objectivity. We've all made our decisions individually on whether the moon landings were fake or were they real. But are those decisions objective or are they purely subjective? Rule number 1, intuition is unreliable, evidence only. Rule number 2, everyone is biased. We must use evidence to see through the bias. Rule number 3, evidence is never perfect. We must go with the best available evidence. Rule number 4, we will apply our standards equally. And finally, this is the big one here. I want to make a big deal about this one. We will acknowledge the best evidence even if it goes against our prior beliefs. We will strive to update our beliefs to match the evidence and share our findings with others. If we discover that the DSCOVR satellite was faked, we are going to accept that discovery and we're going to share it forward. On the other hand, I expect Alan to hold up his end of the bargain. If we are able to show that this evidence he has presented is bogus, I expect Alan to come forward and express in no uncertain terms to the author of this evidence we're about to see his findings on this. With that in mind, let's get into it. What is the evidence? We're about to watch a clip from a science contrarian going by the name of FlatFact. I do not want to have anybody go over to that channel and harass this person. I'm not addressing this video directly to FlatFact at all. I'm not doing a debunk. In fact, maybe you shouldn't go to FlatFact's channel, as that would only feed the algorithm, making the problem worse. On now to the claim. Evidently, FlatFact was using a software package called VRML to render an image of the moon. She was troubled by the very bright highlight right in the center of the moon that comes in evidently as a default artifact in VRML. We're going to hear from FlatFact herself. She thinks the highlight in the DSCOVR pictures, where the Earth looks very brightly lit right there in the center, is a clear indicator that they have used VRML to render this image. I don't want it to be a straw man, so let's hear her say it.
On screen now is the original VRML file before I edited it and changed the texture. It had this white light in the middle of it, and every time you spun it around you would just see it. Can you see that light right in the middle? This is an official NASA file, brought to you by the dead technology of virtual reality markup language, VRML.
Did we just witness proof that the DSCOVR satellite is faked in VR? No, not even a little. Of course not. If we were to take this claim seriously, there are numerous avenues we could pursue to research deeper and compare the minutiae of the lighting of the different packages and what was used and what is VRML. But instead, I want to talk about something different. The video is not about whether the Discovery satellite is real or not. The video is about how to make the determination of what is real and what is not real. What we just saw in that video is just pure speculation and intuitive thinking. There is absolutely no logic being applied. There is no critical thinking at all. Let me see if I can boil the claim down to a few concise words. Number one, the lighting in the VR package had a bright highlight in the center of spherical objects. Point number two, the lighting from the DSCOVR satellite on the Earth showed a bright highlight in the center of the Earth. Therefore, the DSCOVR image must have been created using that exact same VR package. Are you seriously suggesting that highlights in the centers of spheres cannot exist in the natural world and only happen in CGI rendering? Perhaps you're saying that that particular highlight is so unique that it cannot be duplicated in the natural world? I think we can agree those are preposterous statements, and they're not even worth the time of investigating. But maybe you don't know anything about the world of lighting, whether it be CG or natural. So let's take a quick look at a simulation that I knocked up in about 10 seconds where I'm showing a bright highlight in the middle of a sphere in my CG renderer. This is what happens with the default material on a sphere when you shine a light directly at the center of it. Is that in some way peculiar? Of course not. Renderers like these are designed to try to emulate the natural world and what the real world looks like under these kinds of lighting conditions. And what kinds of lighting conditions are we talking about with the DSCOVR satellite? Let me challenge you to do a little bit of critical thinking. What should the lighting conditions be when a photo is taken from the DSCOVR satellite looking at the Earth? Where will the light be coming from? Maybe you don't know much about the DSCOVR satellite. Maybe you don't know what the lighting conditions should be. Looking at one of the DSCOVR images should give you some clues about where is the light source for this image. What is the light source for this image? Of course, it's the sun. Where is the sun in this image? Is there any reason why the sun should be shining directly on the Earth in all the photos from the DSCOVR satellite? In case you weren't aware of it, due to the specific location of the DSCOVR satellite, it is directly between the sun and the Earth at all times, meaning the sun is always behind the DSCOVR satellite, and so any photo it takes of the Earth will always be completely lit. And of course, with the Earth being a sphere, we expect to see a highlight in the middle of the Earth. But that's not really super relevant to the conversation, is it? Let's take a look at our original 5 rules and see how we've done with this. When FlatFact analyzed these images and compared them, was she using intuition or was that evidence? Was that a purely subjective analysis or was there any objectivity to it at all? Did FlatFact allow her bias to lead her to a conclusion that was not justified by the data? Okay, it's time to get real. Alan, I hope you understand. I've been trying to increase the engagement in my video here a little bit, be a little bit more entertaining. I don't want you to feel like I'm taking it out on you. This is a very important topic. Let's try to treat it with a little respect and take the whole thing down a notch. Let's try to objectively score how this particular piece of evidence fits with these guidelines. Now, I think that it would be fair to say that, Alan, you have not applied your standards of evidence equally to both sides. I hope you wouldn't find that contentious at all. I think that when you are presented with DSCOVR images, despite the fact that they are backed with the providence of trained experts, educated people who have studied and worked for decades to get to where they are now, and they can show you absolutely every minute detail about this project, its planning, and how it came forward. And yet, you remain highly skeptical of the evidence they present. On the other hand, when someone named FlatFact on YouTube with no credentials whatsoever simply makes an unsubstantiated claim that the highlight on the Earth could only be created by something called VRML, you found that compelling. And I think that is a clear indicator of a major bias on your part. What FlatFact presented there doesn't count as evidence of anything. All she even claimed was that there's a highlight on the Earth and there's a highlight in the VR package. Perhaps you don't have a whole lot of experience with CGI rendering and software packages and lighting in general. That's fine. You're not the expert, so perhaps in that case, you might be swayed by the words of someone who claims to be an expert or seems to be an expert. And that's fair, but you're not applying your standards equally. You took the words of this YouTube expert who has no credentials whatsoever, and yet you rejected the word of people who have actual credentials and can actually back up absolutely everything that they've said. Hopefully I have established through all my ranting tonight that the so-called evidence from FlatFact about the highlight being unique to that VR package was quite silly. Take a moment to just compare these images yourself and tell me, are those truly the same highlight at all? The only similarity I can see here is that they're both highlights and they're both in the center of the sphere. I have not proved that the DSCOVR satellite is real. I cannot rule out the possibility that perhaps these images are created in something called VRML. But hopefully the one thing we have established tonight is that this image in no way proves that they were created in VRML. The troubling thing to me is not the suggestion that perhaps the images could be faked. The thing that bothers me is how such flimsy evidence can become so convincing if you allow your bias to take over. At this point, I would like to respectfully ask that you invoke rule number 5 and perhaps let FlatFact know and others in your circle know that what she has presented here does not count as evidence for anything. That doesn't prove anything. It shouldn't prove anything to you or anyone else in your circles. Doesn't mean DSCOVR is real out there. It just means that we need to create better arguments. We need to apply better evidence, and we need to apply our standards of evidence equally and without bias. That's the only way we're ever going to achieve any kind of objectivity, any kind of understanding of the real world. Whatever's actually out there, we're not going to discover it with conjecture and intuition. The only way to find out what's really out there is to apply harsh objectivity. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Alan, I hope you found this a respectful treatment and taking seriously your evidence and hopefully breaking down the logical flaw of presenting this as if it is evidence. In the next video, I plan to take up Alan's other point, which is truly a very good argument, something verifiably objective. We're going to look at images of the dark side of the moon and try to evaluate whether they have changed over the years. Hopefully, I'll see you over there.